Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to move this thing away from me a little bit. There we go. You know how I like to start sermons off usually by telling you a story. You may have heard this one before. But nevertheless, once upon a time, there was a day that came when a man walked into a psychiatrist's office doing this. And he kept doing this. And so the psychiatrist asked him, "Why are you doing that?" And the man said, "To keep the pink elephants away." And the psychiatrist said, "There are no pink elephants here." And the man said, "See, it worked." Well, be that as it may, magic plays an undeniable role in the lives of most people in all kinds of ways, whether they cross their fingers and knock on wood or carry around a rabbit's foot for good luck. Or perhaps they cringe in front of a cracked mirror, or they change their direction if they see a black cat cross their path. All of us occasionally fall under the spell of some kind of magic. And usually, these actions are nothing more than silly, harmless little superstitions. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes dependence upon magic can leave individuals helpless in life and death situations. And then such magic is quite a far cry from the foolishness of athletes who insist upon wearing the same smelly, unwashed, lucky jersey game after game. And it is also far removed from the enjoyable entertainment that some of us have had. For example, from stage magicians, performers like David Copperfield, who once cut my own tie in two to my daughter's great joy. Sometimes we come across situations where ordinary people are practicing very different forms of magic that do not consist merely of illusion, but instead of delusion. And I'm here to tell you this morning that delusional thinking is always dangerous. Now, unfortunately, it is delusional magic which often becomes a part of religion. And it sometimes costs people not only their time and their money, but occasionally even their health and their lives. Years ago, I used to show my college students and some of my congregation members a video that dramatically illustrated all of this very well. It was taken from the then popular TV news magazine West 57th Street. Maybe some of you saw it. They had a program that focused upon two faith healers, so-called, and how they were exposed as being frauds by a magician known as the Amazing Randy. All this is online, by the way, video and everything. Now, the first charlatan in that episode was the Reverend W.V. Grant. He raked in over $7 million a year at that time, broadcasting his faith healing program over 90 American TV stations. Now, after Randy showed that his program was nothing but a straightforward magic act, Grant's influence and his income both drastically dropped. Part of Grant's worship services consisted of what Randy referred to as a pure mind-reading act. Grant would bring people from the audience, and he would pretend to know everything about them by divine revelation. All kinds of stuff. He would rattle off, for example, their names and their addresses. He would rattle off their illnesses and even their doctors' names. Now, what he did not do, of course, was tell the audience that he had gotten all of that information, very personal information, from individuals who interviewed them before the show and passed it on to him. Now, another trick that Grant used, one of my personal favorites, was something Randy called lengthening the short leg. Bringing some feeble person up out of the audience, up on stage, Grant would tell that individual that the reason he had difficulty walking was that one leg was shorter than the other. And then he would put, usually a man, in a chair up on the stage, and he would, in his hands, raise the man's legs up. And as he did so, he would slightly turn the man's legs to the audience. Can you see what I'm doing here? So that by the time the audience could see what was happening, it was very clear to them one leg was shorter than the other. Now, not only did he rotate the legs out of parallel situation, but he also slightly pulled the shoe off the longer leg, extending its distance just another inch or so. The audience was quite convinced. And so Grant went through his little spiel, and from the audience's perspective, everything was perfectly kosher. Grant would pray to Jesus, he would speak in tongues, and then he would miraculously claim that the short leg had been healed, that it had grown to its proper size, and of course, as he rotated everything back and put the legs back on the ground, everything was as it should be. Totally deceived by what had happened, the emotionally overwhelmed victim would then stand and return to the audience praising Dr. Jesus for the miraculous cure. Randy denounced this stunt as being the kind of thing that 12-year-olds might do at a Boy Scout camp. Now, Grant's masterpiece, however, was something called the wheelchair cure. Anyone entering the auditorium who seemed to expose any kind of difficulty in walking would be placed in a wheelchair. And then that individual would be pushed up to the front row on either side of the congregation. When it came the appropriate time in the service, Grant would then go over, pray over all of these people in all of these wheelchairs, and then have some of them get up and walk around. Now, a news magazine came and asked one particular woman if she thought her cure was a miracle. And she replied, "Well, not exactly. I wasn't crippled. I just had difficulty walking, and it gave me a chair." Now, despite that, she added, "But I do think I feel much better." Now, she was further asked if she did not find it funny that Grant would pretend to have her cured in this way, and her response was, "Well, I believe in miracles anyway." Now, even more damning in that show was another reverend that they talked about, the amazing Randy's exposure of the Reverend Peter Popoff. Real name, real person, Popoff. He was a faith healer who at that time appeared on some 52 national TV stations and was making money hand over fist. He went out of business for a while, but he's back. He's still making money, but in a much more modest way. Now, Popoff's service at that time included his knowing personal details about members of his audience, and again, all of this, supposedly, he claimed anyway, through revelation, but Randy and his team discovered that the revelation was not divine, it was electronic. It consisted instead of a radio receiver in Popoff's ear, hidden away where the audience couldn't see it, and a radio transmitter backstage where his wife sat to talk to him. Now, she would give him all kinds of data about the members of the congregation, of the audience, that the staff had collected on little note cards as everybody filed in the building. Here's an example of how all of this worked. There was a transcript in the show, and in some articles that were published about the show, as Popoff roamed through the audience listening to God tell him all of this stuff, this is what he actually heard through the earpiece from his wife's own mouth. She said on one occasion, "Hello, Petey. I love you. I'm talking to you, Petey. Can you hear me? If you can't, oh, you're in trouble." And then came specifics from her about one woman that a staff member had singled out for special attention. She said to him over the earphone, "Reeford's got a hot one, Petey." And then she laughs. Reeford's so excited, he came running back here and scared us half to death. "You're ready for a hot one? Okay, here it comes. Want a hot one? Really hot, hot off the press. Ruby Lee Harris. Ruby Lee. She is standing in the far back there where there's no chairs. She's got lumps in her breast. Have her walk down. Have her run up there to you. Oh, run, look, there she goes." Loud laughter again. This is all recorded by Randy. Giggles from the wife. "A home run, Petey, a home run." Now, later on, when asked by an interviewer why he used such deceptive practices as this hidden radio receiver, Popoff said very calmly that the Holy Spirit had not told him to do otherwise. Now, worse even than such trickery, Popoff also demanded that his audiences trust in Jesus and throw away all of their medicines. And so, at the end of each of his services, dozens of bottles of pills, nitroglycerin, digitalis, other life-saving medicines were tossed up onto the stage and made a big pile. And you have to wonder what happened to him after the show. At any rate, he promised Dr. Jesus would heal. Now, those of us who grew up in the Judeo-Christian tradition should not be surprised by any of this, because after all, the Bible itself is filled with magic, some of which is condemned, of course, but a lot of which is accepted, expected, and respected as part of the activity of Yahweh's priests and prophets and messiahs. All ancient peoples practiced magic. Exorcisms, propitiations of good and evil spirits, amulets, salves, nostrums, figurines, scapegoats, and charms were commonplace. Ancient peoples used magic for everything. They consecrated buildings. This, for example, would have a dead body before and underneath the doorway out there to ward off the evil spirits when this building would have been built. They used it for childbirth, to ease pain, to reduce fever, to stop toothache, to prevent the plague, to cure dog bites, heal burns, stop bleeding, relieve headache, overcome impotence, ghosts and demons, combat the evil eye and slander, prevent oath-breaking, empower curses, give success in business, in love, in war, in court cases, to contact the dead, to protect the soul on its journey to the underworld after death, well, and many, many other things. Now, some cultures distinguish between good or white magic and evil or black magic, praising the one and damning the other, but other cultures treated all different kinds of magic as if they were of the same value and quality. Now, for its part, the Old Testament describes all kinds of magic and magicians. It recognizes persons who burn their children as sacrifices, diviners, soothsayers, augurers, sorcerers, charmers, mediums, wizards, astrologers, necromancers, and a whole bunch more. Now, it did condemn some magical practices, especially, you'll be glad to know, if they were conducted by women. But it said that Yahweh, the biblical God, blessed other forms of magic such as dream interpretation, remember David and others, clairvoyance, water manipulation, magic rods, blessings and curses, decisions made by drawing lots or by suffering ordeals or by throwing dice. Now, the classic Old Testament example of a magician, you know this already, was Moses. Just look at what Moses could do with his magic rod. He could turn it into a serpent. He could touch the Nile River and turn that into blood. He could point it at Egypt and cause a wind bringing locusts upon that land. He could use it to part the Red Sea. He could strike rocks and cause water to flow from them. Now, in the New Testament period of the Greco-Roman world, there was an abundance of magicians and miracle workers, healers and physicians, and such a man also was Jesus of Nazareth. The wise men, the Magi, and the legends about Jesus' birth were, of course, typical examples of magicians, as was Simon Magus, mentioned in Acts 8-9. But the supreme New Testament example was Jesus himself. And if you ever want a whole book length, very readable by the way, education on Jesus, there is a book by Harvard scholar Morton, like the salt, Morton Smith, called Jesus the Magician. You will not put it down once you start reading it. Now, while some of the magical elements that were reported about Jesus are simply legendary stories, fictions, such as the walking upon water, there is no doubt at all that the historical Jesus did go around going through the motions of doing magical exorcisms and faith healings. The clearest cases of magic in relation to Jesus were the ones in which he used spittle. You all know that, don't you? As John M. Paul says in a very difficult to read book, Hellenistic Magic and the Synoptic Tradition, Paul says, all races of antiquity attached magical significance to spittle. They believed that the power of a man was in his saliva, and that the spittle of a very powerful person could be used to perform all sorts of wonders. They all did this. They all knew this. The Roman Emperor Vespasian, for example, supposedly healed a blind man with his spittle. And sick pagans would go to various pagan temples to be licked by sacred snakes and sacred dogs whose spittle was curative. Now, in the Gospels, Jesus applies his spittle to the deaf and blind. He utters some magic words similar to open sesame, and the cure is complete. Now, in some of his other healings, Jesus is recorded as having said things like, "Your faith has made you whole." But he did not say that in relation to spittle. It was not faith, it was not Yahweh, it was not Jesus, but it was the magic words and the magic mucus that did the trick. Now, the same was true for later Christians. There's a whole history of Christian magic, at least 3 or 4 centuries long. They also used spittle to cure all kinds of things. And there is one famous story about a Christian priest named Macarius, who healed the blindness of wolf cubs by spitting into their eyes. There was no faith involved in that, of course, not on the part of the cub. Now, after Jesus' death, the church continued to practice magic for a long time. Scholars have documented hundreds of specific cases. So what then is magic? And how does it differ from religion? And why does magic persist even today in our supposedly modern scientific world? Over the past 250 years, all kinds of scholars, Edward Burnett Tyler, for example, James Fraser, Emil Durkheim, Branislaw Malinowski, and a bunch of others, have written absolutely fascinating books about this subject, and they answer the questions I just raised. These scholars have shown that magic, religion, and science have always existed in every culture. Moreover, they have shown that while magic and religion seem similar, insofar as they both rely upon occult or supernatural powers, magic really has more in common with what we would think of as science than it does with religion. Whereas religion believes in supernatural divine interventions in which gods and goddesses do miracles that violate the natural laws, both magic and science believe that there are immutable laws that are not under the control of any deity. The fatal flaw of magic, of course, is that the laws it believes in don't exist, whereas there is some abundant evidence that the laws science believes in do exist. Nevertheless, both magic and science hold that if a person abides by the specific rules of the respective laws and does exactly the right ritual or the right experiment, then without doubt and without any divine intervention, each and every time the expected result will occur. And furthermore, these results will be obtained under human control and will not depend upon supernatural beings such as deities, nor will they require that humans humble themselves in any kind of prayerful supplication. Now, scholars have demonstrated that whereas the principal function of religion is a social one of preserving groups and their traditional values, the principal function of magic and of science is more individualistic and utilitarian, because their aim is to solve specific, short-term, practical, personal problems. Religion, by contrast, is usually concerned with value judgments and with long-term, that would mean eternal, solutions to otherworldly problems such as hellfire. Now, as Malinowski states in his wonderful little book, which I encourage you all to go out and read immediately, Magic, Science, and Religion, it's very readable. He says, science is founded on the conviction that experience, effort, and reason are valid. Whereas magic, he says, is founded upon the belief that hope cannot fail, nor desire deceive. Both magic and religion, he says, open up escape routes from such situations and such impasses as offer no other empirical way out except by ritual and belief in the supernatural. Now, his words explain why magic persists in our modern scientific world. On the one hand, the agricultural, industrial, electric, electronic, and computer revolutions have brought marvelous benefits to most people in most societies. We now have the resources, literally, to feed everyone, to light every city, to communicate anywhere and everywhere, and even to travel to the moon. We have eradicated many plagues and diseases, and we are beginning to understand the human brain and the human genome. But on the other hand, we have also used these scientific revolutions to increase our ability to hurt and kill one another. With nuclear bombs, with ecological disasters, and with unending global strife that won't even allow us to distribute the food that we can and often do grow. Another scholar looking at all of this has expressed it this way. He has written, in a world in which many have perceived that the scientific and technological way of doing things has contributed as much good as we all know, it has also contributed, he says, to creating contemporary problems as to resolving them. It has contributed to all kinds of disasters. Therefore, he says, the hope that science and technology have brought has been somewhat dissolved. Some have responded to all of this with feelings of helplessness by turning to magic and religion. Magic in particular, he says, counters feelings of helplessness with the proposition that humans can master their world through occult power. He quotes Malinowski. He says, as Malinowski has argued, magic appears in those phases of human action where knowledge fails. In the light of Malinowski's analysis, this man concludes we should not be surprised that the decline of confidence in science and technology has been accompanied by a contemporary revival of magic and of witchcraft. Well, Jesus, as you may recall, was famous for having said at one point, the poor you will always have with you. He could have said the same thing about magic. So long as there are problems that cannot yet be solved by science or technology, there will be some people, especially the poorly educated and the intellectually and the emotionally immature, who will, as a last resort, turn to magic. Only by using our own powers of reason can we protect ourselves from becoming victimized by this false path and by these false prophets. And only by educating our children and grandchildren and so on can we prepare them to resist the temptation to give in to such fantasies of wishful thinking. Now, humanistic Unitarian Universalists are not normally very tempted by the seductions of magic. They understand that in the natural world life is not always fair, and that some suffering is the inevitable price that people pay for the joys and the splendors that they experience most of the time. Their consolation in the midst of any crisis, therefore, is the profound knowledge that a good life, well lived, is always its own reward. Theistic Unitarian Universalists are likewise not very susceptible to the charms of magic. They know that if there is a God worthy of the name, that deity will be good and loving and merciful enough to take care of them even when science and technology fail. If they have matured in their faith sufficiently, they also understand that it is naive and inappropriate to expect that a good and a just deity will give them just anything they ask for, because some of those things will be bad for them or for other people, and will have arisen as their wishes out of their own human selfishness. They thus recognize that even Jesus overstated things when he told his disciples that they could ask for anything, even that mountains be moved aside. But Jesus was right when he told his disciples to pray, "Thy will be done." For that phrase covers everything that would be divinely acceptable. And so, this morning, when you leave here, I want all of you to go out to your cars. Please do this for me. It'll probably stop traffic. It'll be wonderful to watch. Go out to your cars and yell at them, "Open sesame!" And see if the doors pop open. Now, if they don't, I also want you to do something else. I want you to give science and technology a try. Take out your keys and use them. And then give your door handles a little attention and see if that gets your doors open. Because if it does, you will then have learned everything you need to know about magic.